part 2 of chapter 15, I think, of the sinking of the Titanic. 14, maybe. No, 15. Part 2, chapters 15. 3 hours later, just after 9 o'clock, the car Panthea docked in New York City in a thunderstorm. There were thousands of people waiting on the pier. But the first person George saw as they walked down the gangplank was Papa. He rushed to George and Phoebe, grabbing them both, pulling them to him. All around them, people cried with happiness. Others just cried, their tears mixing with the pouring rain. They introduced Papa to Marco and Enzo, but there wasn't much time to talk. They're train to Millertown. Millerstown was leaving soon. And an ambulance was waiting to take Marco to the hospital. Luckily, George didn't have to say a real goodbye to Marco and Enzo. Aunt Daisy was staying in New York City to take care of Enzo until Marco's feet were healed. And then they would come with her for a visit to Millerstown. Seeing the way Marco and Aunt Daisy were looking at each other, George wondered if maybe Marco and Enzo would stay forever. George sure hoped so. As they rode to the train station, newsboys screamed from every street corner. "Read all about it. Titanic survivors in New York. More than 1,500 people dead. Read all about it." George covered his ears. He wanted to forget everything about the Titanic. He wanted to push it out of his mind forever. Chapter 16. But he couldn't. Even back on the farm, surrounded by friends from school and neighbors from town, he felt like he was still drifting in the dark ocean. And each day that went by, he found himself drifting farther and farther away. At night, when he got into bed, he'd see the faces of all those scared people on G-deck. He'd seen the ship disappearing into the sea. He'd remember the stabbing cold and the screams of hundreds of people crying for help. He didn't bother trying to fall asleep. Each night after Phoebe and Papa were in bed, he went out into the woods. He was heading back into the house one night when he heard a noise through the bushes. Was there something there? There was something there. He could sense it. Was it the panther? He took out his knife, fighting the urge to run away, and peered through the branches. George stared in shock. It was Papa. He was sitting on a large rock, looking up at the sky, smoking his pipe. He looked like he'd been there for some time. Papa turned. He didn't look especially surprised to see George. "Sorry to give you a scare," he said. "What are you doing here?" George asked. "I don't know," Papa said. "Sometimes I just come here when I can't sleep." George couldn't believe it. How many nights had they both been out in the woods at the same time? Papa eased himself on the rock and began walking back towards the house. "I'll take you up to your bed." "No, Papa," George said. "I come to the woods too." Papa looked at him with a very slight smile. "I know that," he said. Papa knew? What else did Papa know about George? What else didn't George know about Papa? He and his father looked at each other. Really looked. For the first time in a long time. Maybe since Mama died. George suddenly started to cry. They took him by surprise, his tears, and he couldn't stop. He cried for all those people who didn't make it out of the water. He cried because somehow he did. He cried because he knew that no matter how much time went by, a part of him would still be out on that ocean, and he would never forget. Papa held George's hand and didn't say a word, and then he led George over to the boulder where they sat together under the stars. George stared up at the sky. Were those really the same stars that had burned so brightly above the black ocean that night? Was he really still the same boy? George couldn't stay out of trouble. George who didn't try hard at school. George who found the escape ladders. George who pulled Marco to that lifeboat. Who didn't give up. They sat on the boulder for a long while, and as the sun started to peep over the trees, George had told Papa about Mr. Andrews. He said he thought one day I'd build a ship. Papa didn't laugh. He puffed on his pipe, looking thoughtful. "How about we build one together," Papa said, "a nice little boat for the pond. I've always wanted to do that." "That's a good idea," George said. "A great idea. We could start today," Papa said, standing up and holding out his hand. They walked back to the house together. The birds were singing softly. The chickens were squawking for breakfast. A breeze was whispering through the trees, and a voice seemed to sing to George very softly. "Awake, awake, it's now daybreak, but don't forget your dreams." Papa looked into the woods like he could hear it too. Now we're going into the acknowledgments and stuff at the end of the book. My Titanic story. This book is a work of historical fiction. That means that all of the facts about the Titanic are true. But the main characters came from my imagination. George, Phoebe, Aunt Daisy, Marco, and Enzio are based on people I learned about while researching the Titanic. By the time I had finished writing this book, they sure felt real to me. I can see George now relaxing in the little boat he and Papa built, rowing around their pond while Phoebe watches from the shore reading a book about dinosaur fossils. I can picture Aunt Daisy and Marco's wedding, how Enzo would run down the aisle with a huge grin on his face. That's my favorite part of being a writer, giving my characters happiness in the end. If only I could do the same for the 1,517 people who didn't survive the sinking of the Titanic. What a sad and terrible story. One day I was trying to finish the book. I needed a break, so I went to New York City with my 11-year-old son Dylan. We stopped to rest in one of my favorite neighborhoods in a tiny park on West 106th Street and Broadway, with trees and bronze statue of a woman lying on her side. I read the bold writing engraved on the marble bench, and to my surprise, I saw that the entire park was a memorial to two famous New Yorkers who died on the Titanic, Isidore and Ida Stratus. I couldn't forget the Titanic, it seemed, not even for an afternoon, and nearly 100 years later, the world hasn't forgotten either. Lauren Tarshis. Facts about the Titanic. More has been written about the Titanic than any other disaster in modern history. I try to include as much information as I could in the book, but here are some more amazing facts that I wanted to share with you. The Titanic was the largest ship, the largest moving object ever built. It weighed close to 50,000 tons and was 11 stories tall and 4 city blocks long. There were 2,229 people on board, and there were 2,229 people on board, 1,316 passengers, and 913 crew. The survivors include 498 passengers and 215 members of the crew. The passengers came from 28 different countries, including many from America, England, Ireland, and Finland. There were a few passengers from China, Japan, Mexico, and South Africa. Most of the crew members were from England and Ireland. There were 9 dogs on the Titanic. They stayed in kennels, but their owners could take them out onto decks for walks. 2 Pomeranians, and 1 Pekingese survived with their masters. After the sinking of the Titanic, laws were changed to require all ships to carry enough lifeboats for every passenger and crew member. For decades, divers, scientists, and treasure hunters searched for the wreck of the Titanic. It was finally located in 1985 by a team led by the U.S. scientist Robert Ballard, 2.5 miles below the surface of the sea. Ballard and his team did not take anything from the wreck. Mr. Ballard believes the Titanic should rest in peace as a memorial to those who died. But he couldn't stop the treasure hunters diving to the wreck and removing thousands of artifacts. Jewelry, dishes, clothes, even the ship's hull. What do you think about this? Do you think the Titanic should be brought to the surface or left in peace? Can you survive another thrilling story based on true events? Read on for a sneak peek at I Survived the Shark Attacks of 1916. 10-year-old Chet and his best friends Dewey and TJ rushed down the path towards the creek. It was the hottest day anyone could remember in their little town of Springfield, New Jersey. So hot, Papa actually let Chet leave work early to take a swim at the creek. They stripped off their clothes and raced to the dock. Chet was the first one to leap into the air and cannonball into the creek. Dewey splashed down right after, with TJ just behind. "Chet, catch," TJ said, sending his rubber ball through the air. Chet leaped up and caught it, and then turned and threw it to TJ. But TJ was looking down the creek. His eyes were so strange that Chet almost dropped the ball. TJ looked terrified. "What's wrong?" Chet said, looking around. Last summer, a snapping turtle had almost bitten off Dewey's finger. There were also snakes, a few mean enough to bite you if you got too close. But TJ was looking at something else, something Chet had never seen before, a black triangle sticking up through the water. Could it be? Was that a shark's fin? No, Chet thought, shaking his head. It couldn't be. His eyes were playing tricks on him. His mind was messed up because of those shark attacks down the shore. But those two men attacked while they were swimming. The blood, the ladies fainting on the beach. No wonder they were seeing sharks in the creek. There couldn't be a shark in the creek. That was crazy. Chet tried to laugh, but TJ was still standing there with that terrified look. And now Dewey was rushing through the water towards the grass. "Get out of the water!" he yelled. The black triangle was coming right at them. Faster, faster, closer, closer. Chet swam as fast as he could, but TJ just stood there, frozen. "TJ!" Chet sounded. "Hurry!" But it was too late. The shark was heading right for TJ, and he screamed. There was a huge splash, and then he was gone.